Good afternoon and welcome to SentencingStats.com. I am Mark Allenbaugh, Chief Research and Strategy Officer. Today, August 23, 2018, we're going to discuss a tale of two sentences, the leaker and the liar. The leaker being Reality Winner and the liar George Papadopolous. Briefly, as those of you who have been following the news, Reality Winner is a former NSA contractor who leaked information, actually some classified material, to a news outlet just over a year ago that essentially warned the public and others about the Trump administration's involvement in Russia, or alleged involvement in Russia. George Papadopolous was a former, I guess, a staffer, if you will, of the campaign, and he has been charged and pled guilty to lying. As a matter of fact, both of them were charged and have pled guilty to various counts, and we'll discuss each of their cases and the sentences now. So here on the left is a charging document for Ms. Winner. Because her case involved issues of national security, her plea agreement has not been made public. But this charging document is public, as she was charged and pled guilty to one count of willful retention and transmission of national defense information, confidential, obviously highly classified material. The statutory maximum there, as you can see, is 10 years and a fine of up to $250,000. Cut to the chase, a few hours ago, she was sentenced per the plea agreement, as we'll see, to 63 months, 5 years and 3 months in federal prison. Here is part of the first page of George Papadopoulos's plea agreement that he's already pled guilty to. He pled guilty to violating one count of 18 U.S.C. 1001, which is the false statement statute. It's a very commonly charged statute, as opposed to the 793 statute that Reality Winner pled guilty to. That's rarely charged, as we'll see here. The 1001 carries a maximum penalty of 5 years imprisonment and a $250,000 fine. So this here will review Ms. Winner's plea agreement, or actually this is a sentencing memo from the government in Ms. Winner's case that was filed last week. As you can see here, even though we don't have access to the plea agreement, the sentencing memoranda the government was available online. Here, her final offense level is 29. Under the sentencing guidelines, there are 43 offense levels, one being the lowest, 43 being the highest, 43 being life. Her total offense level was a 29, as they agreed to. She had no criminal history, so her criminal history category was only 1. With those calculations, her advisory sentencing guideline range was 87 to 108 months. But nonetheless, the parties agreed to a 2-year downward variance down to 63 months, or 5 years and 3 months. And what's interesting here is the government noted, and was widely reported too, that her sentence will be the longest sentence ever served or ever imposed if she was to get 63 months, which she did, for somebody who has leaked classified material to the media. That is true, I guess, but we'll see. And here is a Justice Department press release that was just issued about an hour ago, indicating that, in fact, she was sentenced to 63 months, followed by 3 years of supervised release. So let's look at some data here. This is what Sentencing Stats is known for. Now, normally what we would do is an actual full-blown analysis and charts, and we're going to see that once we turn to Papadopoulos. But here with Reality Winner, there's just so few people that have been charged and sentenced that, frankly, an analysis is rather pointless. Here, as this chart, and this is just the raw data, I formatted it somewhat to make it easier to view. We can see that only 10 people have been ever sentenced under this particular guideline, which is 2M 3.3, the sentencing guideline that her conviction goes to. Again, so she was sentenced under 2M 3.3, and we can see the sentences here ranged from anywhere from 0 months to actually a high of 72 months, which is why I was a little hesitant in the government indicating to the court that was the highest sentence ever imposed for somebody. I guess the key clarification or the key modifier there, highest sentence ever imposed for someone that leaked to the media. There was actually somebody who received a higher sentence under 2M 3.3, 72 months, but that individual, in that case, I reviewed it, did not leak to the media. He was also a government contractor that stole confidential information. Actually, he was a government employee, worked for NASA, stole some, his last day of employment, stole a bunch of confidential material, and he was going to use it as a government contractor for his new job once he left the government. So he leaked it to his new employer, but didn't leak it to the media. Frankly, it's kind of a distinction without a difference. And at any rate, she received, at 63 months, she obviously has the second highest sentence ever imposed, which again isn't really saying all that much because this is just rare. It's a rarely charged federal offense. Just since 2006, there have been over 1 million people. Well, just since there were the sentencing guidelines, there have been over 1.5 million people sentenced under the federal sentencing guidelines, which began back in 1986. So the fact that only 10 people have ever been sentenced under this particular guideline for espionage, or really for just, it's not espionage per se, but just disseminating confidential or classified material. The fact that only 10 people have been sentenced under that is quite telling. It's a very rarely charged offense, and counsel could use this in the sense that because it is so rare, how meaningful are these guidelines? Because the government charges such offenses that go to 2M 3.3 so rarely, there's an argument that these guidelines, whatever they advise, are rather meaningless because they're not based on any empirical data. And that obviously is true here, given that since 2006, which that's our data only goes back to 2006 because of the Booker case. That's another issue. But just in the last 12 years, with only 10 cases, less than one case is brought each year. There's, I think, a very strong argument that counsel can make based on the lack of data that these guidelines are rather meaningless. And not sure if the government or if defense counsel consulted the data before negotiating the plea agreement, but certainly in a case like this, I would have suggested that counsel do that. Maybe the intent was to give her, obviously the intent was to give her a very significant sentence, but one that's the second highest ever under 2M 3.3 and the highest ever for somebody that disseminated to the newspaper. There's an argument that I'm not sure, all things considered, it was justified, especially when we turn to Papadopolous here in a second, because in a sense, these cases are related in that they involve the Trump administration and the dealings of the Trump administration with Russia. So now let's turn to Papadopolous. This is from his plea agreement, publicly available plea agreement, and I've highlighted here what his sentencing guidelines ultimately are. And what the parties agreed on here is that his sentencing guideline is 4, unlike 29 for Reality Winner. At a 4, it's so low, his sentencing range is only 0 to 6 months, and it's been misreported that the government is asking for 6 months. The government is not. The government is asking for a sentence within that range, which could be 0 or up to 6 months, but they are not pushing for 6 months. As a matter of fact, when you look at the government sentencing memo that was filed last week in Papadopolous' case, you can see here that I've highlighted, while they're not saying, what they're not telling the court that it should impose a sentence of 1 month or 30 days, what they are suggesting is that the court does that. As indicated here, they also reference another case related. This Alex van der Zwaan, he was the first person sentenced under the Mueller special counsel investigation. He was the first one to be convicted and sentenced. He was an attorney that worked for and lied to the FBI. He had some involvement with Manafort and the campaign, as I recall. At any rate, he was related to this. He was within the broad umbrella of the special counsel investigation, and he received a 30-day sentence. So the only reason why the government would point this out here to this judge is that, Papadopolous basically committed the same offense. He also, to avoid unwarranted sentencing disparity, which federal judges are supposed to do, should also receive 30 days. Even though they don't come right out and say it, they get darn close to it. So if I was the press, I would say that the government is suggesting or recommending or strongly suggesting to the court that they impose a sentence of at least 1 month. Certainly a hell of a lot less than what Reality Winner is now received, which was, again, 63 months. But if we were to look at the statistics, Papadopolous isn't to be sentenced until next month, sometime in early September. But so unlike Reality Winner, who was charged with a 793 offense, 18 U.S.C. 793, which, again, as I discussed, rarely charged, the 1001, or the false statement offense, is very commonly charged. There have been thousands of these cases over the last just 10 years. And here what we were able to do is drill down into the sentencing data itself, and we discovered that there were 731 cases identical to Papadopolous in the sense that they were convicted of a 1001 charge, sentenced under 2B1.1, which is the general fraud false statements guidelines. They had a final offense level of 4, criminal history category 1, pled guilty, and were sentenced between 2006 and 2017, which comprises Sentencing Stats' entire database. We don't look at data prior to 2006 because of the Booker case. Prior to 2006, really in 2005 and before, the sentencing guidelines were mandatory. The U.S. Supreme Court in 2005 in United States versus Booker ruled that they were now advisory. So that's why we don't look at those. It's a different universe prior to the Booker case. So looking at all the post-Booker advisory sentences, this is what we see here. This is a box and whiskers chart that demonstrates or illustrates the sentence distribution for all 731 cases. And so what we see here is the first the minimum, which is 0, and we know that obviously it's going to be pretty clear that many people in criminal history or with the final offense level 4 aren't going to get any prison time. So we know the low end for those who meet these criteria was 0. Also, the first quartile was 0. That's very, and also, as it turns out, you don't see the median line here because the median was 0. The median sentence for all those, just like Papadopolous, was 0 months or straight probation. And the median, for those who recall, means 50% of the data points are below us, the median, 50% above. So we know at least half received at least half received a probationary sentence. The top of the box here is the third quartile, or this basically indicating that 3/4 of everybody that are similarly situated or had these identical criteria received 4 months or less. The average was only 2.2 months, as indicated right here. The high was 10 months, or really what we call the upper bound. This isn't the maximum. This is a statistical boundary above which, any sentences above which, and there were, are considered statistical outliers. There weren't many, but you have some anomalous data above this. But the way Excel works, without getting too technical, is it calculates, when it creates these box and whisker charts, it creates upper and lower bounds based upon the statistical distribution of this box here, which is called the interquartile range. You have the third quartile and the first quartile here, and essentially what you do is you take this, multiply it by 1.5, and add it to here, and find the closest data point to 1.5 times the interquartile range. A little bit more technicality than you deal with, but this is the world that Sentencing Stats lives in. Okay, so what Papadopolous almost certainly, what his defense counsel almost certainly is going to ask for is no time in order to avoid unwarranted sentencing disparity. And statistically, he would be justified in seeking a sentence of no time, considering that the bulk, most people sentenced under having this criteria receive no prison. They'll receive straight probation, or some of them might receive, let's say, 3 months home detention or 3 months in a halfway house or something like that. The average, again, is only 2.2 months. The government only is really suggesting 1 month, which is well within this interquartile range. So, frankly, that also is reasonable, but that is a bit on the that would be a higher sentence than what most receive. My guess is, though, because there has already been somebody within the special counsel's investigation that has received a 30-day sentence that met this criteria. Van der Zwaan, although I don't have all of his data up here for you, he also was charged, convicted, and pled guilty to 1001, and this also was his guidelines calculation of final offense level 4, criminal history category 1. Because he received 30 days or 1 month, my guess is, my educated guess is that also Papadopolous can expect to receive 1 month in prison. And by the way, what's interesting about that, the federal system, there's something called good time credit, where defendants can receive up to 54 days off of their sentence for every year that they serve within prison. But in order for that 54 days, which is almost 15% off, you'll often hear the 15%, which is more like 14.8% off of the sentence for good time. The good time only kicks in if you're sentenced to more than a year. So if you're sentenced to a year or less, you do that full time. There is no good time credit. So he's going to do that full 30 days, most likely in a local jail. They're not going to send him to a prison, assuming he receives a 30-day sentence. At any rate, this is what this presentation illustrates, is how the data can be used and analyzed in very disparate cases to either assist in a plea agreement or plea negotiation, to allow a client or defendant to see what his or her potential exposure may be, as well as to, most importantly, assist the court in determining what an appropriate sentence here. So if I were the judge in Papadopoulos' case looking at this data, I would be certainly I would be well justified if I was to impose a sentence of either 30 days or no time. To sentence him to 6 months, which is the top of the guidelines range, which is what the parties agreed. The parties did agree anywhere from 0 to 6 months, even though that they're free to argue for whatever sentence that they'd like. They nonetheless agreed that the guidelines range, advisory range, is 0 to 6 months. A 6-month sentence way up here is far above what most people receive and would constitute an unwarranted disparity. So I don't expect the judge here to give him 6 months. My again educated guess here is that he's going to receive 1 month. Okay, so thank you very much for your time. Look out for future editions. We're going to be covering Michael Cohen's sentencing, what he can be looking at, as well as Paul Manafort in his second trial. Now that will begin next month in the District of Columbia. Thank you.